Let's get more on Apple's event and the new iPhones. Joining us now is Gene Munster of Loup Ventures. Gene, great to see you.
Hi, Melissa.
Hi. How do you think about Apple's run-up so far this year, the valuation of Apple, given if what Josh is saying is true, that it's a 2021 event, simply because, I mean, even if I were into 5G and wanted speed, my carrier doesn't have a full 5G offering. So why am I going to go buy this new phone now?
Well, there's two pieces at play here. One is what's going to power the iPhone franchise for the next year, and that really is this legacy base. They've added 90 million iPhone owners that have 3 years old or older iPhones. That's typically when you get into that upgrade window. So massive tailwind coming into the next year. That's positive. That's going to get them to those that step up in growth next year. The Street's looking for 15% revenue growth from flattish this year. So feel comfortable on that for the tailwind. That has nothing to do with 5G. I agree with your comment, Josh's comment also, that some of the comments today from Verizon specifically, I think really overstate where 5G is at. And I think as consumers start to get a hold of these devices, they will start to understand that the speed just simply isn't there. That is not an indictment about the 5G opportunity longer term. This is massive. And for Apple, this is going to be a 3-year upgrade cycle. So think of it this way. 2021 is the year of the old iPhones, people upgrading their old iPhones, next year, and then 22, 23, 24, a 3-year upgrade cycle around 5G. So I am most optimistic, but I think there is a layer of caution in terms of what consumers should expect about that 5G experience for the next year.
Why should we think that after 3 years, consumers will upgrade their iPhones if they still work, if we're in a pandemic, if people are uncertain, about their economic prospects, if they're going to be employed in a year? I mean, I've got a 7, and it still works okay. This is definitely more than 3 years old.
Let me ask you this, Melissa. It works okay, but are you thinking about that upgrade? I suspect that thought has crossed your mind. That's ultimately, to answer your question is how is this going to continue to propel? Is that the iPhone business was flat last quarter, and so despite the pandemic, it's been flattish. Now, that's different than what's happened with the Mac and the iPad business. Those two are about 20% of revenue, and they were up 30%, massive step up from flattish growth before. They're seeing the benefit of work and educate from home. But the iPhone has been more at a kind of this level base. And so I think ultimately is that it's pretty straightforward, is that we depend on these devices. And no one in the world makes a better device than Apple. I try to keep a very steady, middle-of-the-road approach to all of this, but I think that is a statement in fact. This is the best phone, and in these times, I think that the iPhone is going to benefit from that. I would just put out one more piece, too. I was critical about 5G coverage from the carriers. That's in the carrier's court, not Apple's court. And Apple's added 5G to their phone lineup, but kept prices the same. And so 2-3 years ago, when we talked about adding 5G to phones, these were $1,400 phones for the starting points. Now we're talking about a $700 starting point. It's a very different dynamic, and I think Apple is in a great position to be patient here and capitalize on this trend over the next few years.
Hey, Gene, it's Tim. Speaking of the carriers, how about a driver coming from Verizon who stepped forward and talked about financing and trade-in options? And is this going to bring a larger replacement cycle to people that might have been on the fence, but the carriers are back in play? They're doing this again. This was a big part of 2 or 3 cycles ago.
Exactly. They're back at it. They're going to be a part of it, but it's not an incremental update. It's not an incremental tailwind to this. The carriers and their promotional activity, they get behind these phones. They want to be a part of it. And so I don't view that as it's neither a negative or a positive. I think it's simply the carriers in this space and in this equation are neutral. I do believe that there is a subtle detail about Apple's event today that gets missed. And if I may, Melissa, just quickly talk about HomePod Mini. This is less than 1% of revenue. They've now have a $100 version versus the previous version at $300. So that's what's going to capture the headlines. But I think what gets missed in the headlines, and this gets back to the question about where Apple goes over the next few years, is the ability of that device to integrate with your iPad, your iPhone, CarPlay, other services. Is remarkable, and no other company can do it. And I still beg this question to the investing community more broadly. Why is it that Apple now trades at an inline multiple with the other big tech brethren? Why is it, I believe it should trade at a premium? This is something that no other company can do, bring these devices, these experiences together. And I think it's going to move the stock higher. I suspect $200 in the next few years. And I think it's still a reasonable multiple to get there.
I do want to ask you about Amazon, Gene, but I want to ask you one last question about that the notion of the super cycle. If you don't believe the 3-year upgrade cycle and you think it's going to be more like 4 years or 5 years, is that still a super cycle?
It is. I don't know what the right way to express it. Super cycle is usually just a boom and a bust. And so I don't have a good way to kind of express that, but I would say typically it's a 1-year cycle, and sometimes they're big 1-year cycles. Think about the iPhone 6, for example. But there's boom and bust. I think we're going into a slow rising tide over the next 4 years, different drivers each year. And I think this is the best way to invest in 5G is to own Apple.
Shepard Smith here. Thanks for watching CNBC on YouTube.